everybody. This is Alan Petersen with Meet the Thriller Author, and I'm excited to have H.Y. Hanna on the podcast today. Welcoming her back. She is a best-selling writer of cozy mysteries, and she's now having a psychological thriller that's coming out on May 12th. So it's called the Taverna at the Edge of Night. So very excited to welcome H.Y. to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, so nice. So let's get a little bit about your history too. I know that you're switching genres now, so that must be very exciting. But can you tell us a little bit about your background and what's led you to releasing this new book here coming up next week in a few weeks?
Yeah, it's a bit of a checkered history. I suppose I feel like when you listen to many authors talk, they always say that, they always knew they wanted to be a writer, and they started, from very young age writing stories, and even if they do other jobs, they often, they knew that writing is what they really wanted to do. And I feel like for me, it's always been the opposite. Like I spent most of my life trying not to be a writer and sort of fighting it every inch of the way. I'm Chinese, and so if you know a bit about Asian culture, you'll know that there are only really four acceptable jobs. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, and an engineer, and maybe a dentist at a push. And so if you being creative isn't really seen as a gift, it's really seen more like a curse. And
Oh, wow.
if you say you want to be a painter or a dancer or a writer, your parents would be absolutely horrified because create it's fair enough. I mean, creative jobs are generally they're quite unstable, and they have poor prospects very often. And so it's sort of and I suppose I was always I was very sensitive to expectations as a child. I was a very dutiful, sort of obedient child, and I was very sensitive to what was expected of me. And so I always felt this huge pressure to conform and to do the right thing. And so I think I spent a lot of my childhood and early adulthood really just suppressing this urge, if you like, to it was almost like a shameful secret, like this, almost like a sickness, like this compulsion to want to write. And it kept leaking out everywhere, of course. I mean, my classmates in school hated me because I would always be begging the English teacher to give us an essay for homework because I just wanted any excuse to write something. But mostly, I just didn't even you wouldn't even consider it remotely as never even as a hobby seemed very shameful. And so, I left university and I did what I thought was the right thing, which is like to get on the corporate ladder and, work in an office. And I tried lots of different jobs, and I think I was actually very unhappy really in all of them. But I just never really wanted to consider why. It was very much like I was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but I didn't want to admit that I was a square peg. And it really took till I was about well, I was approaching 40 really. So that's when I started, you have a milestone birthday coming up, and that's when you start thinking all these things, this kind of thoughts like, what am I doing with my life? And I'm all the years are passing by, and I was married by then as well. And my husband is this amazing man. He's incredibly supportive and sort of very, very encouraging. And he really firmly believes that you should do what makes you happy. And so he kept encouraging me and saying you should try and find a way to earn a living from writing because that's what you really want to do. And so, but I think, to be honest, I think what really, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't really for the ebook revolution or the Kindle revolution, if you like, and the whole phenomenon of independent publishing. Because for the first time in my, I was reading and I came across these stories of indie authors who were having commercial success, and I looked at it and I thought for the first time I could envisage a possible viable career this way, because I guess I knew enough about the traditional publishing that it's a very well, first of all, you could be waiting a lifetime to be published. It's unfortunately, your fate is very much tied up with other people. And and also, even if you did get published, I knew that most traditionally published authors just don't earn a living from, and it's not their day job, and it's just an unfortunate reality. And I'm not, of course, not saying that being an indie author means that you're guaranteed of that either, but it just seemed to me to have a more, I don't know, like a path that was a bit more in your control. And so I threw myself into it really. That was like I just thought this could like it could work. Like I felt like I'm not afraid of hard work, and I love learning. I wasn't afraid of what was involved, as long as I knew that there could be a chance. I could do it. Um, and so I threw myself into it. And my first goal was very much to earn a living from my books, because that for me was the most important thing. And in a way, I couldn't justify it to myself. Like,
Mhm.
I know it sounds really crazy, because I think it's hard to explain if you don't come from an Asian culture, but there's so much kind of like negative pressure about this kind of thing that you almost feel like, it is almost like a very shameful thing. And so I felt like the only way I could justify it was if I could prove that being a writer was as good as if I'd done one of those proper jobs. And so the financial side was very important to me, and I dabbled in various genres to begin with, and I wrote romance for a while because everybody said that's what sells. But I kept putting a dead body in all my stories. And so and after a while I started thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't be writing romance. Maybe I should be writing crime fiction, because that is what I like to read personally.
Mhm.
And then I sort of fell into writing cozy mysteries. I had this idea that was inspired by my time studying and living in Oxford. And so I, started a series that was based around a tea room in Oxford. And I was very lucky that the books, did very well, and I just had this amazing readership, and I think when it happened, it was terrifying, really. I was absolutely terrified, because this was something that I'd always been told was just impossible. Like, you'd be stupid to even think about it, and then suddenly it was happening to me, and I was almost like, I just, I was writing like a maniac the first few years, because it was almost like something was chasing me at my heels, and I
Mhm.
I felt like any moment it was all going to just disappear, because that's what I always been told. I had all these voices that said this is
Mhm.
fake and this is a completely unreliable job, which it is, to some extent. But and I just put my head down. I was just writing and writing and writing and trying to, write the next book and write the next book. And I think it was almost like one day you looked up and 10 years had passed, and which was almost quite frightening in itself. And suddenly I looked around, and I was this established author. I had like translations and audiobooks and foreign rights deals, and just, I'd written like 30 mystery novels, and it was almost like a shock. And I realized that I'd sort of in a way achieved what I, always thought was not possible. But at the same time, I think I was starting to feel a sense of, I mean, first of all, I was slowing down a lot. And I think partly that was burnout, just because
Yeah, I
you
can
just can't
imagine.
maintain that pace. Because I was really, I think, working from fear more than anything else. But also, I think I was probably beginning to feel like I needed a break from writing cozy mysteries after 10 years.
Mhm.
And also, I think, again, I was approaching another milestone birthday. I was approaching 50 this time. And I, again, all those thoughts start coming, where you start thinking, what do I really want to do with my life? And I realized that what I really wanted to do was write the kinds of stories that I really love to read. And, these were the stories I read as a teenager, that I just, it transported me to these. And they're stories that are, I suppose, the atmospheric psychological suspense is probably how you describe them.
Mhm.
And they're stories where the setting is really, really important, like the sense of place, the atmosphere. And so I decided, in a way, yes, I decided basically that I'm going to take a break from the cozy mysteries for a while and just focus on writing these types of stories that I always wanted to tell.
And so, who were some of the writers that you liked in that genre that inspired you as a writer?
And well, my absolute favorite author is Mary Stewart, which I'm not sure many people know of her nowadays,
No,
but
I'm not
she's
familiar with
she's
her.
so she's dead now. But she wrote, her pop books were popular in the 60s and 70s and 80s,
Mm.
and she wrote very much what I suppose now would be called women in jeopardy. So they're very much really atmospheric, psychological suspense, or suspense, classic suspense, really, and they're set often in these beautiful but possibly deadly, locations. So, the south of France, in Greece, on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. So there were places that I love. They're the kind of rugged, wild, untamed setting that has places that have lots of atmosphere. That I
Mhm.
love those kind of settings. And I give me a wild moor every any day with fog over like a beach with tropical palms, palm trees and things. And so she was very much a huge influence, and in particular, the book that my first psychological thriller, was very much inspired by one of her books I read, which was set in Crete.
Mm.
But so she was one. But there are various. I find that most of the authors I gravitate towards always have a certain thing in common, which is that their writing style tends to be very lush and descriptive and full of beautiful, rich prose. And I know sort of description, I feel like sort of fallen out of fashion a bit in modern times. There's very much a drive towards more minimalist type of
Hmm.
writing. Because I think we're all, we're about people's attention spans, and it's like, you have to try and move
TikTok
the story along.
generation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and you want to move the story along as fast as possible. But I don't know, for me, I love stories that have that real rich sensory detail and rich descriptions, and they really take their time to settle you into the place,
Mhm.
and the atmosphere is as much part of the story as what actually happens. And so, yeah, some of my other authors I read, they were mostly, because I was living in the UK at the time, authors like Minette Walters, who wrote psychological thrillers, or psychological suspense. I love Val McDermid as well. So she writes, again, quite dark sort of psychological suspense or thrillers. But again, very, very atmospheric. Like just, you could almost taste the atmosphere when you're reading them.
Nice, nice. And so, what was so tell us a little bit now. This the Taverna at the edge of night. Can you tell us a little about that? I see that's set in you already mentioned in the Greek islands there.
Yeah.
So have you visited there? Is that why you always wanted to write a story set there?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. So it was initially this book I read by Mary Stuart, which was called The Moon Spinners, and it was
Mm.
set in Crete. And I read it when I was 14, and it made a huge, I mean, all her books did, but in particular Crete, I don't know, for some reason, Crete just really touched me. And I just love this idea of this wild and untamed and sort of rugged, it's the biggest Greek island, but unlike some of the other Greek islands like Mykonos and some of the others, which are very, I guess, almost like honeymoon Greek islands.
Mm.
Crete is still very much untouched. Parts of it are very wild, and it's sort of, there's a rugged kind of sense of beauty, and I love those kind of landscapes. And I just, when I read that story, I just desperately, desperately wanted to visit at 14, and I didn't, and actually until what happened was when I turned 50, which is a couple of years ago, I decided that was going to be my big treat to myself, and because I wanted to set this book there, I wanted to write a story of my own set there that would do for people what that book did for me in a way. And so I booked a book research trip there really, and I went and I did, I had an idea in mind, but it really was the setting, because for me everything starts from the setting. Like for a lot of authors, I think, it's often like the characters or like a what if kind of
Mhm.
situation. But for me, usually it's I go somewhere and I think, oh, this place would be such a good setting for a story. And then my imagination just starts kicking in, and I start thinking of a story. And because for me the setting is so important, it has to be woven into the story really, so that it can't have happened anywhere else. So yes, I went to Crete, and I had this amazing time just going around sort of, partly it was a book pilgrimage. So I was trying to find all the places in Mary Stuart's book. And I literally was there with on Google Maps, trying to find places, because she sets her stories in real places and she writes in such a descriptive way. You literally can almost, like, it's almost like being a book detective. You can
Mhm.
find the places. And so I went and tried to follow the path of the story and visit all the places. And while I was there, one of the places I visited was the beach that her story was set in. But the beach, there isn't actually a village there. It's just a beach. But there was a single taverna there, which is set up on this hill looking down. And I went and, I mean, it's not like the story, it's a very basic taverna. And the owner thought I was completely mad because I turned up with this and this, awaiting my copy of this old tattered paperback, and just gushing about this book and how I'd been wanting to visit this beach since I was 14. And I think he just thought I was a crazy tourist. But the funniest thing was his father, who was his very elderly father, was there as well. And the father came and spoke to me, and he said to me that he remembered an English author visiting. So
Oh,
I don't know if
wow.
it could have been her, but it was very exciting. And so when I came back away from that, I just thought I had to have a taverna in my story. And then it's not obviously the same taverna, but it's sort of, I guess my version of the whole thing. And that sort of sparked it from there. But really the story is, I suppose, in a way, me trying to transport my readers to Crete and to what could happen there.
Hmm. Yeah, I love how it's compared to like the White Lotus because I love that show. Is that the kind of get that feel?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, yes. I sort of say that as a shorthand. People say give a shorthand. I said my
yeah.
my book is going to be a bit. It's a bit like the White Lotus meets Daphne du Maurier, I suppose. Or do you know Rebecca?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, so it's that very much. It's a first person immersive perspective. So rather than sort of a multiple POV, which is sort of I think more dominant now, it's very much an immersive first person view, and you are with the protagonist with her the entire way. So you experience the whole story with her, and it's and yes, it's very kind of the atmosphere of the place is partly
Mhm.
what's the suspense comes from the sort of what's underneath all that.
And I'm kind of curious too, because like we already talked already before, you've had a lot of success in with the mysteries. Did your process change now writing this type of book, or did you stick to what's been working for all these years?
It's a bit different because with cozies, there's quite I wouldn't say a formula, but there are quite strict expectations, I
Hmm.
suppose. And obviously that's being pushed now. There are people doing really interesting things within cozy mystery, but I think the traditional cozy and what I wrote was very much a traditional culinary cozy, set in a tea room, and there was very much British baking was my sort of thing. It's there are expectations, they expect sort of obviously the pet, the cat,
Yeah.
the nosy old. I've got the nosy old ladies, and it's set in a quaint English village. And the characters tend to be larger than life, so it's more, I suppose, black and white, or that's the expectation. I
Hmm.
I always struggled, I think, with that aspect of the cozy, and so for me, there was a wonderful sense of liberation in writing a psychological thriller because in this genre, the morally grey is really almost encouraged.
Yeah.
It's what we are delving in. Whereas in cozies, I think that's part of the comfort of a cozy is that the bad people are bad and the good people are good, and that there's usually often, for example, one of the unspoken rules is that the person who gets murdered is usually not a very nice person because
Hmm.
then you don't feel bad about it, and then um and I think for me that I always really struggle with that, and if you read my cozies, you'll see that because my villains often do tend to be morally gray. Like you'll get to the end of the story and you'll realize that they had very good reasons for doing what they did. And so I probably was breaking some of the rules without really intending to. And so when I came to write this, I think it felt almost a bit like I was just letting myself go. Like it was lovely, really, just to not worry too much about certain genre expectations, I suppose. And I suppose maybe, I mean, obviously there are genre expectations in psychological thrillers as well, but maybe I don't know because it's probably fit the way I naturally am. I think what one thing that I did find quite difficult was that it took me a while to realize what type of psychological thriller I was writing
Hmm.
because very much the word thriller, is the sort of idea of like pacey and plot driven and very kind of, fast, fast, fast. Um, and I really was worried about that because my natural voice tends to be, like I said, much more atmospheric and descriptive, and it's more slow burn, I suppose. And the suspense really comes from it's more like a Hitchcock film, I suppose,
Oh
is
yeah,
really how I
yeah.
describe
Mhm.
it. So it's that sense of creeping unease, where you're not quite sure if something is wrong, and the,
Mhm.
the suspense comes from your own uncertainty. You're doubting yourself as much as anything. And so I think that, but because that's the way I sort of naturally think and write, it's that came to me very naturally. So
Mhm.
yeah, that part was.
Yeah. And was your process the same? Like, do you outline or do you write? Do you go for the seat of your pants?
I'm definitely a plotter, not a pantser.
Yeah, me
I need
too.
to. Yeah, I'm actually a bit of a control freak. But as far as writing, I find that I cannot get in the car and just drive. I need to know
Mhm.
where I'm going. But I do find what happens. And I was watching one of your past interviews, and I saw you talk about this, and I thought, oh, that's me too, where you talked about doing a really an outline and then not basically looking at it again.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean I don't do a very detailed outline, to be honest. What I do is I think I do an outline almost to give me confidence to start,
yeah.
and then I just map it out roughly, and then but I have an idea of where I'm going. And also I think for a thriller or a mystery, you sort of need to know the ending to work backwards from that. I mean, you don't
Mhm.
have to, but I think it makes life easier if you do, and so
Yeah.
that you can work in all the misdirection and the foreshadowing and things like that. And so I definitely, feel like, but what happens, I find, is once I start writing, I find that, and I've noticed this over all the books I write, is I get to about 40% in. And then that's when I really realize what the story actually is about. And not so much the actual action sequence, but the what I call the emotional shape of the story. So what I want the readers to actually feel. And then that's when I often will go back and then sort of change a lot of the plot in order to fit that the shape I realize has emerged. And I always say it's a little bit like, if, for example, if you have a visitor come to visit you in the US and you plan a road trip for them,
Mhm.
and your idea was to show them sort of, the achievements of the American people. And so you plan this road trip with like all these cities, famous cities in the US. And then you start driving with them. But as you start driving, but you suddenly realize that actually what you really want them to come away with is the warmth of the American people. And then you then change your itinerary. You end up thinking, well, maybe I won't take them to Chicago. I'll take them to show them a little town instead. And so you start adjusting your itinerary because that you realize that what you really want them at the end of that journey to come away with is that feeling of the warmth of the American people rather than, whatever you initially thought. And so I find that's what happens for me, when I write a book. But
Yeah. It's like a lot of people say that, oh, I can't do an outline because I can't be tied to it. I goes, well, you don't have to be tied to it.
no, you don't. I never follow my
Yeah,
outline
same
really.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was also wondering too now, like I always get into the nitty gritty with my guests because I'm nosy. So what do you write? What do you use to write? Do you use Word or Scrivener or something else?
I'm very boring. I use Word.
Well, most most
I
most
just
of my guests use Word, so you're normal.
Uh, yeah, I open a document, I type chapter one, and then I stare at the empty page for like days on it. But yeah, and I pretty much start from one and just go chronologically. I find I can't scene hop even if I know what I want to write for a scene. But I think possibly because I write in first person and immersive, it's almost like I have to live the story with the protagonist, and I can't write the scene in chapter eight because I don't know how I would feel or she would feel there until I've lived through chapters one to seven. Um, so yeah, it's pretty just boring, just writing every day and just moving a little bit, a tiny little inch forward every day.
Yeah. And I remember you used to if I remember correctly, you used to design your own covers. Did you design the one for the Taverna at the edge of the night?
I Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
did, but I also what I've done is now is because I haven't got the time anymore, really, is that I mock. So that is basically my mock-up, and then I
Mhm.
just send it to a cover artist with the mock-up and get them to do the sort of the little nitty-gritty bits, so
Oh,
the
okay.
proper blending and the color grading, that sort of thing, because that kind of thing takes a lot of time. But
Yeah.
and also things like I know what I'm weaker at, so like typography isn't really my strength. I'm good at the visual stuff, and I have a clear idea of the branding and the sort of general, I guess, tone and what you want to convey. But I don't know. It's always something that I feel very torn about, to be honest with you, because I find that the general advice is not to design your own cover, and you shouldn't really. And that's what I always tell people. And so I always feel very torn about it. And so, like for example, with this, I actually when I started, I didn't do it. I actually I hired a cover artist and I gave them the brief and asked them to design and come up with concepts for me. I just didn't really like any of the concepts they came up with. I just didn't feel that it captured what I wanted. And I think to be fair, it was quite difficult because what I want is a very kind of it's a difficult balance between the beautiful and the dangerous. What I
Mhm.
I needed something that would instantly seduce you, that would make you think, oh, what a beautiful place, I want to go there. You want that feeling of going on vacation, going on holiday, but at the same time hint at the darkness underneath. And so I think that's, I mean, who knows if I achieved it, but
No,
it
you
was
did.
kind of
Yeah,
difficult
yeah, no,
for
yeah,
me.
yeah, the beautiful ocean there, and then you got that little shadow figure there in the back. Yeah, no, very creepy.
Thank you. But yeah, it was a difficult brief, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's and like your daily like your writing process? Do you like write every day? Do you set like word count goals? What does that look like for you?
I try to write every day, but I often don't get to it because, well, you know what it's like being an indie author. It's just,
So much stuff
that
going on.
yeah, it's just, by the time you've and because I'm now got so many projects I'm managing really just with things like translations and audio, but just all the other things I've got. And obviously there's your backlist. I'm
Mhm.
sort of managing about 30 books now, and you've got to obviously do the promotion and maintain them and even just things like fan mail and you're just generally keeping up with everything. It's you have the best of intentions when you wake up in the morning, and then you just often never get to the manuscript, even because everything else unfortunately is in a way equally important, because there's the business side of being an author, and that's the side that's enabling you to write, really, in the sense that it's partly what brings in the income that enables you to write full time. So you're really torn between the two. But I mean, I think what happens is eventually I just think I have to just prioritize the writing, and then I go into like the writing cave, and I basically just stop looking at my emails. I don't, open them till very late at night, and I only respond to what's absolutely urgent, and then I do manage to get the draft done, but it's very, very difficult. It's like a constant battle.
Mhm.
And I do aim for word counts, but I don't generally tend to hit them. I think partly because of the way I write as well. Like when I started this whole thing, I was really trying very hard to just get words down as fast as possible because, again, that's one of the things that's generally, I think, encouraged, especially in the author community. And I didn't realize that my own process is actually quite different, that I basically revise as I write. Like it's almost like a thing that's like rolling as you go
Mhm.
forward. And so that's actually what I'm more comfortable doing than doing the sort of vomit draft onto the page and then doing multiple passes, because that's, I think, the more common way to do it. And
Yeah.
that's probably the better way to do it, because at least you get something down quickly. But my way is like inching forward. But I guess with the positive with my way is that you get to the end and that draft is pretty much ready to go to my editor.
Yeah, I was gonna say you get a
So
clean manuscript. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Cleaner.
yeah. I mean, I do obviously go back through it, but I find I
Mhm.
don't make many changes. There are no, and all the layers and stuff, I'm doing it as I'm going along. And so, but it does mean that it's very slow progress. So I've sort of made peace with that now. And if I can get 1,000 words a day, I'm quite happy with that. If I, towards the end, you speed up because, as you're
You're
reaching the
excited.
climax,
You
you
want to finish.
you tend to just, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But and so if I manage to hit 2,000, that's like an amazing day. But sometimes I only manage 300 words, 500 words, and you have to just and that doesn't mean I haven't, like sometimes I could be sitting at the desk from 8 in the morning and sort of finally give up the ghost at like 8 at night, and all you've got to show for it is 300 words.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's part of it all is managing everything, right? The marketing, the writing.
yeah,
Yeah, it's busy. But even I've interviewed a lot of traditional writers as well, and even most of them have to do a lot of their own stuff now too. Like the publishers
yeah.
just
That's
aren't
what I
doing as much
heard.
anymore unless you're a big name or something. But
Yeah, yeah, no, I heard that.
hmm
But so yes, I think all authors are the same boat. I guess the thing with indies, you have the distribution and the production side of it
yeah.
more. You don't hand that over.
hmm
So yeah, that's the sort of harder part, I suppose. It's just project management, really. It's not like any particular, and obviously, I enjoy it as I wouldn't be doing it. Like I always
hmm
think this is the bed I chose to lie on, and I lie on it very happily.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's just it's just hard in terms of just juggling your time, really, and you
hmm
just wish you could clone yourself.
Yeah. And so, what are you going to continue in on to with your cozy mysteries? You're going to juggle these two. What's that looking like for you in the future?
I think I'm going to take a break from the cozies for a while. I think
Mhm.
it probably would benefit me as well just to have a sort of a complete break from them, and then I can go back to them, refreshed. And also because I really want to focus on these books. I have ideas for multiple. I call them destination thrillers. So
I like
they're very
that.
much they are thrillers, but they are very much defined in a way by being set in this beautiful, exotic, but possibly deadly
Mhm.
location. And because the idea is really about being someone, because I travel a fair bit, and I always, how you pass someone in the airport or something and you see something happen and you always think, there by the grace of God go I.
Yeah.
It always makes you sort of think, what would happen if you're somewhere and you're an ordinary person, you're not a law enforcement agent, you haven't got any special skills, a special set of skills, and you're just a normal person and you're trapped somewhere, you're stranded somewhere, and you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, you're unfamiliar with the local customs, and you get drawn into some kind of mystery or danger, or some, and you have to rely really on your own wits, and that's really, really fascinating for me. So and of course the setting then will decide on, that each setting really decides what happens. And so I've got lots of ideas for different places to set stories in.
Yeah,
So
because they're all standalones, right? This is a
yes,
standalone. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so each one will be a new setting, a new heroine. I mean,
Mhm.
I think the reading experience will be very similar, and probably in a way, the reading experience isn't that dissimilar from my cozies either, from my existing readership, because I don't know, I've been told that I'm quite a voice-led writer, so
Mhm.
I have quite a strong voice, and so my stories all have a similar type of feel and reading experience. And so it won't have the surface trappings, it won't have like the cat and the little nosy old ladies and the baking, that things, but I guess the immersive first person atmospheric kind of story and the experience of it is probably in a way quite similar, even though the setting will be different.
Mhm. And so, what are you working on now? Can you do a little sneak peek, or is that all top secret?
No, I'm working on the next destination thriller, and it's going to be set in Verona in
Mm.
Italy. And yeah, so it'll be a new protagonist and a new sort of premise. It's I can tell you it's partly inspired by the Juliet, but there's a Juliet balcony in Verona, or it's not really her balcony. It's a
Hmm.
fake balcony that was put up there, but it's got this amazing phenomenon where, like, hundreds of thousands of people visit it every year, and it's partly because the Verona government have sort of started this tourism thing. But I think people, when you see some of that, so I went and did a book research trip there last year, and I there's a board there of like notes of people, and it's really quite amazing when you read these notes, like genuine heartfelt letter, because it's become like almost like a I don't know how you call it, like a tradition where people
Oh.
write to her who are, troubled in love. Either they cannot find love or they're having problems in love. And they just write Juliet Verona, and these letters find their way to there.
Oh.
And and they, they're amazing. And you sort of think it's a gimmick, but then you read some of these messages and it's incredibly hard when people are in these situations. And there's this amazing thing called the Juliet Secretary Club, and where people volunteer to reply to these letters all across the world. And so that kind of thing just really, captures my imagination as a
Yeah.
writer. And
Yeah.
and there was actually a rom-com, a movie that came out about this a few years ago, but I of course thought of the thriller version of that. So it's a slightly different take, but yeah, it's just an amazing phenomenon in a way. And so that's why it's what I mean about how the story rises out of the setting, that this couldn't have happened anywhere else, because this setting and this, phenomenon of Juliet's balcony, and people writing this, a fictional figure created by an Englishman who
Mhm.
possibly never even visited Verona. The whole irony of that just I
Yeah.
find really attractive.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome. So
yeah,
oh yeah, so you get the idea for the location first, and then the characters and everything comes after.
yes,
Yeah.
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 That's how I always work.
Hmm.
The setting is first, and then the story arises out of what is unique to that setting.
And so when's that one coming out?
Well, hopefully, if I can do my 1,000 words a day, end of this year.
Oh,
That's the
okay, cool.
plan
Something
anyway.
to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's something I always ask my guests because, if there's aspiring writers that listen to this, any advice that you have for them if they're trying to write their own thrillers, their own psychological suspense novels?
Um, I think what I said earlier that about, because thriller is a vast genre and there are many different
Huge.
flavors in it. And it's sort of, I think, understanding yourself, your own voice, I suppose, and your own interest and your tendencies, and so what flavor of thriller that you're writing, because I think otherwise sometimes some of the advice that's given can really, it might not work for you, or it might, make you cancel out the things that actually make you special, and like, I mean, I just talk from my own experience that when I started, I was really struggling with this aspect of it, and I kept worrying that, I wasn't being pacey enough, and I wasn't moving, because, you feel like, oh my God, there's no dead body in chapter one, or there's no ticking time bomb, and you're not fulfilling, I suppose, the expectations of the genre. But there actually is, for example, a sub branch of thrillers that is very much about this sort of, slow burn, like what I said, like a Hitchcock film. That sort of, the suspense comes not really from, knowing there's a ticking time bomb and knowing it's going to go off. It's more coming from the sort of like, do you hear ticking? Did you think that's, no, I must be imagining it. No, but what's that sound? Do you think that sounds like ticking? And it's that thing going on that's building the suspense. So I think for me, once I finally made peace with that, and then I've, obviously you discover writers that are writing in that tradition, I suppose, then you sort of realize that your voice is really more an asset in that situation rather than necessarily, a problem. And there's that belief that if you lean into what you're naturally good at or what you naturally gravitate towards, that I suppose it's the whole thing about being much more authentically yourself, that you would do better really than trying to fight it. Says the person who's been fighting things all her life. But I'm learning the lesson very slowly.
Yeah, that's amazing because you've had so much success. You say today
Yeah.
seller, you're still like kind of beating yourself up. But that's a very common thread in a lot of the writers that I've interviewed.
Oh,
So very normal.
yeah.
We're very neurotic.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely if you're, starting, like, I think figure out who you are as a writer, like what
Mhm.
attracts you, read the different types of thrillers that you're into, and then lean into that, because there are, it is a broad church, as they say,
Mhm.
and there are different readers for different styles, and so yeah, I think it's difficult though sometimes when you're, especially when
Yeah.
you're starting, because even though this isn't my first book ever, it is my first book in this genre. And so in many respects, I still feel the same kind of uncertainty and doubt and all that sort of stuff that a debut author would feel anyway, because
Mhm.
you just question everything you do because you just it's still, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but yeah.
Well, no, I can imagine because you've had, yeah, like you've had a lot of success in that, and with Cozy Mysteries, 30 novels, and so yeah, it's gotta be a little scary to try something new, but
It's terrifying. It's like leaving a job that you've been very happy in and for a long time, and you're respected and liked there. You've got a stable job that you've done for 10 years in my case, and then going off to this new job where then nothing is guaranteed. It's
yeah.
it's very frightening.
Do you think, do you hear
But
back from your Cozy Mystery fans? Do they get mad at you that you're trying something different? Are they encouraging? Or?
no, they've actually been amazing. I mean, I was terrified. Like, I
Yeah.
think along with everything else, it was guilt as well, because I knew that, I felt like they'd supported me all these years, and they've been amazing fans. And I felt very guilty because I knew that by taking time out to write these books, I wouldn't be writing the next book, in their favorite series. And so
Mhm.
I think one of the reasons I dragged my heels for so long was because I kept dreading it, dreading, like, even announcing that I might be thinking about this. And I didn't announce it till January this year. Like, that was when it took me, like, over Christmas was when I really thought, okay, I've got to just commit to it. Even though I was actually writing this book sort of on the side. I kept
Mhm.
telling myself it was like a secret side project, it was okay, but I would write my proper cozy mysteries. And then eventually I just sort of almost had to admit to myself that really this is what I really wanted to work on now. And then I sort of confessed to them in January, and they've just been absolutely amazing. Like, they've been so, I wasn't expecting. I really thought that there would be a lot more reproach.
Mhm.
And I think the best message I received was from a fan who sent me an email in reply, and she wrote me 6 words. She said, "You write it, I'll read it."
Oh, wow, that's
And
awesome.
that's it. And,
Yeah.
and I just sort of burst out laughing. But it was just, I don't know. I think you're right. Sometimes I think as writers, we're very neurotic, and we get things into our heads. And I
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure many of them were disappointed, but they were far more supportive than I thought they would be.
Yeah, no, that's what I think it's great. I think it's great that you're using your, you didn't like go with a pen name because I thought about that too when I switched genres. But I'm like, I
Oh,
don't want to deal with another. It's hard enough with one name.
yeah. And also, I think in my case, it's because I really thought it was the same reading experience. That's one
Hmm.
reason I decided not to. That I
Yeah.
thought, it's not, I mean, it's like the surface trapping is different, obviously, and it's not like my thrillers are not very dark thrillers. They're not
Hmm.
dealing with serial killers or that sort of thing. I mean, obviously, it's darker than
Yeah.
cozy mysteries, and it touches on some, like, for example, this one sort of wades into the sort of idea of toxic female friendship and that sort of thing. But it's not, as I said, it's almost like the sense of kind of hope at the end and the sense of justice, that the things that
Mhm.
people often want to read a cozy mystery for are still there. Yeah, so
Yeah, and I think that's why people really love these psychological suspense novels and the cozy mysteries, is because it's like regular people. Like we could all see ourselves in that. Versus, I don't know what an FBI agent does. Like I can't relate to an FBI agent, but a regular person I
yeah.
can. Do you think that's why they're so popular?
I don't know. I mean, for me, they are
Yeah.
definitely, like, I always find I always relate better to these to the books, and often they're standalones that
Hmm.
feature a regular person, because yes, you're right. You can imagine yourself in that situation. Maybe you have been in a similar situation. And I think it's why domestic thrillers, for example, are been massively popular because,
Yeah.
everyone is in a relationship or has a family or been in situation with neighbors. And so
Mhm.
it's that, it's that aside from the voyeuristic aspect, there is that thing of this could happen to me and how would I respond in this?
Yeah.
And so I guess mine is a little bit similar. It's just instead of being domestic, it's taking you, like what happens if this happened to you on vacation or when you're traveling for work or whatever? How would you respond?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that idea. Do you find that you also respond much better to the kind of the regular Joe, I suppose is what they call
Yeah,
him?
yeah, I used to, yeah, I mean, I enjoy both of them, but the last few couple of years, I've been reading more domestic thrillers, and yeah, I think that it's just more plausible, and it's like, oh, what are they going to do? It's a detective, you kind of know. So yeah, I can totally see why they're so popular, and that's why when I started reading them, I'm like, okay, I can see why these are so, and they're fun to read and they're fun to write. So
Yeah. I mean, I do love a good, detective
yeah, yeah,
procedural
same here. I
in the
still go back
sense
to
that,
them.
yeah, but more the ones that manage to show you the story, the life behind the detective, I
Hmm.
suppose.
Hmm.
So I'm not so into the sort of Sherlock Holmes type of protagonist, where they or like 007, I guess, where they are perfect and they just never
Yeah.
change. One of my favorite long running series is by a British author called Reginald Hill. And he's unfortunately passed away now, but he wrote a very, very long running series called DL and Pascal. It was an inspector and a sergeant, a British inspector and sergeant. And they're set in Yorkshire, so in north of England, and I love them. But partly because the characters are just so real in a way, and
Yeah.
he had again, there's a very strong sense of place. You really felt like you were in Yorkshire, but he really he captured the vernacular and he captured the way that people think there and all that sort of thing. And so yes, you were reading a procedural and such, and you had the sort of the detective and sergeant, the inspector and sergeant dynamic and stuff, but it was really more than that. And that's why I love that series so much. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's I suppose it's like it's a- everything has its own kind of attractions and
You're right, right. Yeah, sometimes you feel like reading this or that, and you change it up, and then you go back to the other one. But yeah,
yeah.
we all like the one little thing though that regardless of the genre, there's what the character or the location, stuff like that. It's just
Yeah, we have
yeah,
our own little sort of favorite
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. So that's what's fun about reading in this world.
So what would you say is your favorite trope then in sort of crime fiction?
Well, in crime fiction, I was really big into like John Sanford, and I like that type of books. Um, but same
There
thing.
isn't like a particular like a trope or a sort of scenario that you're really into?
Yeah, unlike you said, you didn't like the serial killers. I always like the serial killer ones. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I was into the serial killer thrillers. I always got my attention. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, I like a serial killer. I have quite a lot of like Val McDermott, for example, who I mentioned earlier. She writes, quite a lot about serial
mhm,
killers, and she has a long running series featuring I think he's a forensic profiler or something like that. Who and he deals with a lot of serial killers, and they're fascinating, just the
yeah,
psychology behind that. So I don't know whether it's part of growing old. I think that as you get older, your appetite for that kind of thing slightly decreases. So I know when I was in my 20s, I was massively into Patricia Cornwall and
mhm.
I've still got all her books. And so I really enjoyed that. But I found that as I got older, I sort of was not reading the sort of the hardcore bloody serial killer stuff so much, and maybe
Yeah,
that's just getting older.
yeah. No, same thing with me. The last few years, I still read dark stuff, but they're not like what I used to read when 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah,
So yeah, so that's funny.
I find it with movies as well.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So, okay. So, we'll take too much of your time here. So the Taverna at the Edge of Night comes out May 12th. It's where can listeners find you? What's your website? Where can they learn more about you?
My website is probably the best place because I'm rubbish on social media. So my website is www.hyhanna.com. The HY are the initials of my first name, which is Sin Yi. And yeah, and I have a newsletter, which is really the best place to keep in touch with me because I interact with my readers really through my newsletter. I do also have a YouTube channel, which I just started recently at the end of last year, and I share sort of behind the scenes of my book research travels, and
Oh,
I
cool.
answer reader questions there. So that's just quite a new thing, but I'm really enjoying that, and the readers seem to enjoy that. But yeah, my probably my newsletter is the best place to keep in touch, and through email.
Okay, all right, great. I'll have to check the YouTube channel. I didn't know you had that out there. Oh, that sounds interesting. All right, Shannon, well, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure talking to you, and
It
good
was
luck with
lovely
the
to be
launch.
here.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks.
All right, let me